Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Dear public audience, dear brothers and sisters around the world, today I want to share with you something truly special. After many years of experiences, learning, trials, falls, and rebirth, today a work is born that gathers the essence of everything life has taught me. Its name is Mystery of Life, Volume 1. This book is not a novel. It's not a made up story. It's not a religious manual. It is a mirror of the human soul, a path of reflection and a bridge between pain, consciousness, and spiritual evolution. Within its pages are contained a deep truth that we all have lived, but the few dare to express. And for that reason, today I want to give you a gift, the first seven mystery, the first seven reflection, so that you yourself may enter the spirit of the book. From there, if you wish to continue the inner journey, the complete book will be available on Amazon. But today, I want you to listen, not with your mind, but with your heart. Reflection 1, Anger as a mirror of the soul. Reflection 2, the transit of consciousness toward the spiritual plane. Reflection 3, life is filled with obstacles. Reflection 4, the man who knows. Reflection 5, living in a dictatorship. Reflection 6, the instance of faith and survival. Finally, reflection 7, betraying, hurting, or killing for money. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for walking this path. And always remember, life is not a problem. It's a mystery waiting to be understood. I love you all. Blessings from the Mariquillas, the Yaya, the Mpangayeto and Kisi, and this humble servant, Jose Alberto Espinosa Barrero, Tata and Kisi Angolo, Yente Congo, Onishango, Obalo you. Don't leave yet. Watch the video coming next. You're gonna like it.
Mystery. The Mysteries of Life. Volume 1. Spiritual Reflections that Awaken the Inner Truth. A spiritual, philosophical, and consciousness-based work. By Professor Jose Alberto Espinosa Barrero Tadankisinki Zaango Luyente Kongo One Shango Obao Loyu. 2025 edition United States of America. Legal page, copyright 2025. All rights reserved. No part of this work may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, whether electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written authorization of the author. The content of this book is protected by the copyright laws of the United States and by applicable international treaties. Any unauthorized distribution, sale, edition, or partial or total reproduction constitutes a legal violation and may be subject to civil and criminal penalties. The reflections, teachings, and contents presented herein represent the spiritual, philosophical, and personal vision of the author, and are not intended to be imposed as absolute truths nor to replace the internal, ethical, or religious search of each reader. This book has been created for educational, reflective, and spiritual purposes, and any interpretation or practical application remains under the responsibility of the reader. First edition, 2025. Author, Professor Jose Alberto Espinosa Barrero. Tadankisinki Zaango Luyente Kongo. One Shango Obao Loyu. Printed and digitally distributed in the United States. The unauthorized sale of digital or printed versions of this book by third parties without direct agreement with the author is strictly prohibited. Dedication. I dedicate this book, before anyone else, to God, the supreme source of all light, the silent presence that sustains my steps even when the body becomes tired, the mind grows confused, and the heart is wounded, because without His will nothing that is written here would have meaning or direction, and every word would be nothing more than ink without spirit. I also dedicate it to my family, the backbone of my existence, those who have walked with me through days of clarity and nights of uncertainty, enduring my absences, my silences, my inner struggles, and the sacrifices that have been necessary to reach this point on the path, To them I offer these pages as testimony that all pain, when properly understood, can be transformed into wisdom and strength for those who come after. I dedicate it to my godchildren, who have trusted in my spiritual and human guidance even when life has presented them with trials that seem impossible to overcome. In every reflection of this book there is a hand extended toward you, a voice that reminds you that you were not born to walk dragged down, but to rise with dignity, learn from your mistakes, and honor the destiny that God and the mysteries have assigned to you. I dedicate it to my followers and devotees, brothers and sisters of faith and of the search, who have understood that true spirituality is not reduced to empty rituals, but rather demands responsibility, character, discipline, and an ethic that is neither sold nor negotiated before the deceptive offers of the world. I dedicate it to my sincere friends, those few who have been present when the noise of the crowd fades and only the naked truth of life remains, those who have known how to listen to my words but also to my silences, and who have understood that behind every teaching there exists a story of struggle, fall, rising, and learning. I dedicate it, in a very special way, to the future generations who may never know me in person, but who one day will open this book seeking answers, comfort, direction, or simply a spark that ignites their own reflection on existence. To them I want to say that they are not alone, that the pain they feel others have felt before, that the doubts that torment them today are a natural part of the soul's growth, and that every mystery of life becomes a little clearer when it is viewed with humility, honesty, and respect for the past that we do not yet understand. Finally, I dedicate this book to wounded humanity, to those who have been betrayed, oppressed, misinterpreted, or judged without compassion, because these pages do not seek to glorify the author, but rather to open a window so that each reader may encounter themselves and discover, with the help of God, of noble spirits, and of lived experience, that life is hard, yes, but also profoundly sacred, and that within every mystery there beats an opportunity to awaken, to become conscious, and to rise a little closer to inner truth. Acknowledgements. I give thanks, first of all, to Almighty God, the eternal source of light and justice, whose presence has guided each of my thoughts, my silences, my successes, and also my mistakes, because everything in life, even what hurts, becomes a lesson when it is viewed with humility and awareness. I give thanks to the noble spirits who have accompanied me through the most difficult years as well as the brightest ones, those who have spoken through dreams, signs, intuitions, or deep silences that only the trained soul is capable of interpreting. They have been a pillar and a protective shadow at every step of this sacred path. I give thanks to my family, who has been my support and refuge when the world seemed to crumble, who has understood my necessary absences, my sacrifices, my searches, and my inner battles, and who, even without understanding everything, always offered me a silent love that strengthened my spirit. I give thanks to my godchildren, who have placed their trust in my hands and in my word, allowing me to be an instrument of guidance, discipline, teaching, and correction when life so required. In them I find the meaning of continuing to transmit the ancestral knowledge that I have received with responsibility and respect. I also give thanks to my devoted followers and sincere supporters, those who have understood that true spirituality is not a spectacle nor a fashion, but rather a profound work of character, faith, and morality, a commitment that is honored with actions and not with appearances. I give thanks to the readers who, without knowing me personally, find in my words a mirror, a relief, or an impulse to continue moving forward in their own challenges, because this book also belongs to them, to those who seek answers, to those who wish to grow, to those who do not want to settle for merely existing. I give special thanks to the Congo-Cuban heritage and to Osha, which formed me as a priest, as a man, and as a guide, to the deep roots of Mayombe, of Briumba, and to the Orichas, who sustain my vision of the world and who taught me that the strength of the spirit only flourishes in those who live with honor, responsibility, and truth. Finally, I give thanks to all those who, in one way or another, have been part of my history, even to those who placed obstacles in my path, because without them I would not have learned resilience, patience, nor the clarity necessary to write these pages with the sincerity and strength they hold today. Prologue. This book is born from an ancient silence, from that inner space where the human being stops speaking to the world and finally begins to listen to himself. It is not a work written from comfort nor from emotional distance, but from the deepest cracks of existence, where questions hurt, where losses transform, where mistakes teach, and where faith sustains even when strength seems exhausted. The mysteries of life are not discovered in temples filled with noise nor in apparently spiritual discussions that only seek the approval of others. They are discovered in the solitude of conscience, in the weight of responsibility, in the clarity brought by suffering, and in the light that appears only when one has the courage to face their own darkness without fear and without excuses. Each reflection contained in these pages has been forged at the crossroads between human experience and spiritual understanding, at the intersection where pain stops being punishment and becomes a teacher, where life ceases to be a simple passing of days and begins to manifest as a path filled with signs, warnings, revelations, and necessary trials. In this book you will not find empty theories nor repeated doctrines without soul. You will find truth just as life has shown it to me, raw at times, luminous at others, but always honest, always committed to awakening in the reader deep thought, conscious reflection, and the responsibility that we all carry for the simple fact of existing. I do not intend to teach from a superior position nor to impose beliefs as absolute truths. My intention is to accompany the reader through words that were born from my own process, from my mistakes, from my silent victories, from my necessary falls, from those who seek me, from the signs that God and the spirits have shown me throughout the years, and from the humility that comes with accepting that the human being never fully finishes understanding himself, but can, with discipline and will, draw a little closer each day to inner truth. This book is a bridge between the spiritual and the human, between the sacred and the everyday, between the invisible forces that guide destiny and the decisions that each individual makes in daily life. To those who reach these pages seeking answers, I will tell you this: life never responds the way one expects, but it always responds the way one needs. There is no revealed mystery without sacrifice, no growth without confrontation, no awakening without pain, and no evolution without first breaking the shell of ego, fear, and ignorance. This book does not seek to entertain, it seeks to open inner doors, remove old thoughts, illuminate painful memories, awaken dormant strengths, and in many cases, help close wounds that time did not heal because the person never dared to face them. True spirituality does not consist of pretending perfection, but of accepting one's own imperfection with courage and dignity. It consists of walking with one's head held high even when the soul is tired, of rising with faith when life insists on putting us to the test, of listening to the voice of God when the world is filled with noise, and of understanding that every human being, no matter how humble, carries a divine spark that cries out to be recognized, respected, and developed. May this book be for you, reader, a companion in that process, a reminder that your story matters, your wounds do not define you, your doubts are not signs of weakness, your searches are brave, and your soul, even when it sometimes feels lost, has a purpose waiting to be revealed. Today I offer you these pages with the same sincerity with which I stand before my spirits, with the same responsibility with which I guide my godchildren, with the same firmness with which one faces one's shadows, and with the same hope with which one looks at the dawn after a night of struggle. May every word be light for those who need it, strength for those who feel weak, comfort for those who carry pain, and a path for those who seek a way. And may God, the mysteries, and the conscience of each reader do the rest. General Introduction. Life is a complex territory where every human being, consciously or unconsciously, fights a different battle, silently carrying questions they dare not formulate, wounds they do not know how to express, and hopes that do not always find a place to rest. This book exists to open a space where the reader can contemplate their own existence with serenity, depth, and honesty, without masks or appearances, and where each reflection serves as a mirror that reveals not only the light we carry within, but also the shadows we have accumulated along the way. The intention of this work is not to offer definitive answers, because the mysteries of life are not resolved through rigid formulas or prefabricated explanations. Rather, they are understood through introspection, lived experience, humility before the unknown, and respect for the inner processes that each person must walk through at their own pace and with their own truth. The pages that follow were conceived from a profound understanding of the human and the spiritual, from the awareness that the human being is not only body nor only soul, but a sacred crossroads where material impulses meet, where emotions shape character, where faith sustains difficult moments, and where conscience illuminates actions when one decides to live with purpose. Life, no matter how harsh it may be, always leaves signs, always warns, always guides, but only those who learn to observe with attentiveness, to listen with patience, and to feel with authenticity, manage to discover that in every experience, no matter how painful or confusing it may seem, there exists a message, a lesson, or a necessary elevation. This book invites that kind of gaze, a gaze that does not flee from conflict, that does not deny suffering, that does not romanticize ignorance, but rather dares to enter the depths of conscience in order to find there an order, a purpose, and a transforming strength. None of these reflections is born from intellectual whim, but from life itself, from the moments when one is forced to stop, to reconsider, to fall, to rise, and to face one's truths with maturity. Each teaching written here is the result of years of observation, of spiritual service, of accompanying others in their pain, and of understanding that the human being, beyond their external appearance, carries inner universes that determine their destiny. In these words there is learned pain, tested faith, accumulated wisdom, resolved doubts, open searches, and a conviction that has grown stronger with the years, that the spirit never stops growing, that the mind never stops learning, and that the soul never stops speaking to those who have the courage to listen. This book is not meant to be read in haste, it is to be contemplated. It is not consumed like a story, it is meditated upon. It is not interpreted through superficial logic, it is felt from the depth of the heart. Each reader will find something different within it, because every person carries a different story. Some will find comfort, others will find warnings, others will discover new strengths, and others will recognize in these pages a truth they had always felt but had never been able to name. That is the true purpose of this book, to offer words that illuminate, that awaken, that challenge when necessary, but above all that accompany the reader on their inner journey, reminding them that life is not a senseless chaos, but a carefully designed stage where everything that happens has a why, a purpose, and a perfect timing. May this work be, then, a silent guide for those who dare to go deeper into their existence, a reminder that the mysteries of life are not out there, but within oneself, and an invitation to walk with greater clarity, greater strength, greater faith, and greater awareness toward the inner truth that every soul holds and that few have the courage to discover. Index. The Mysteries of Life, Volume 1. Cover page, 1. Inside page, 2. Credit/inside title, 3. Legal page, copyright, 4. Dedication, 5. Acknowledgements, 6. Prologue, 7. General Introduction, 9. Index, 11. Section 1, Fundamental Reflections, 13. 1. Anger is a mirror of the soul, 13. 2. The transition of consciousness toward the spiritual plane, 15. 3. Life is filled with obstacles, 18. 4. To the Man Who Knows, 21. 5. Living Under a Dictatorship, 24. 6. The Instinct of Faith and Survival, 27. 7. Betraying, hurting or killing for money, 30. 8. The Transformative Silence of Human Pain, 32. 9. The Value of Human Resilience, 34. 10. The Secret Fragility of the Human Being, 36. 11. The Invisible Weight of What We Keep Silent, 38. 12. The Hidden Burden of Spiritual Fatigue, 40. 13. The Void That Forces Us to Reinvent Ourselves, 42. 14. The Fear That Paralyzes and the Courage That Awakens, 44. 15. The Nostalgia for the Moments That Will Not Return, 46. 16. Repentance That Transforms Consciousness, 48. 17. The Search for Meaning in the Midst of Chaos, 50. 18. The Wisdom of Knowing How to Wait, 52. 19. The Silence That Speaks Louder Than Words, 54. 20. When Destiny Places You on the Right Path, 56. 21. The Moment When the Soul Decides to be Reborn, 58. Final page of Volume 160. The Hidden Chant of the Mysteries of Life, 60. To be continued, The Mysteries of Life, Volume 263. Section 1, Fundamental Reflections. Every human being walks with a hidden universe within, made up of thoughts that are never spoken, wounds that are never shown, and truths that are rarely acknowledged. Section I of this book, dedicated to fundamental reflections, opens the reader's heart so that they may contemplate those intimate territories where inner growth truly begins. Here are gathered teachings born from deep observation of the human soul, from the conflicts that shape character, from the silences that reveal what has not been said, from the mistakes that teach more than successes, and from the inner strength that awakens only when life demands evolution. In this first part, the reader will encounter reflections that touch directly the root of the spirit, the struggle against the inner shadow, the awakening of conscience, the acceptance of pain as a teacher, the value of clear thinking, and the importance of standing firm in faith when the world threatens to collapse. Every word is written with the intention of opening doors, not closing them, of illuminating conscience, not imposing ideas, of accompanying the sincere seeker in their process of self-discovery and spiritual strengthening. May this section be a mirror in which each reader can recognize their own battle and, at the same time, discover that within they carry the strength needed to transform themselves. Reflection 1. Anger is the mirror of the soul. Anger does not appear in life as an enemy that must be destroyed, but as a mirror that reveals what the heart has kept in silence for far too long. It is a force that arises when something within the human being has been ignored, wounded, denied, or repressed, and its purpose is not to lead us to destruction but to show us, with brutal honesty, the parts of ourselves that need attention, healing, and understanding. Anger is an uncomfortable teacher, but a just one, a messenger that does not lie because it is born from the deepest part of the soul, where emotions live that cannot be disguised. It is not always a reaction to an external enemy, many times it is the sign of an internal battle that one has not yet learned how to face. Most people fear their own anger because they do not know how to interpret it. They believe that getting angry is a sin, a weakness, or a shame, when in reality it is an emotional language that expresses pain, injustice, fear, or exhaustion. Repressing it only turns it into resentment, letting it explode without control turns it into destruction. True wisdom lies in listening to it. Whoever learns to listen to their anger discovers what truly hurts them, what needs to change, what can no longer be tolerated, and what must be healed in order to restore inner balance. Anger points out boundaries that have been crossed, values that have been violated, wounds that remain open, and truths that demand to come into the light. There is no authentic spiritual growth without confronting one's own anger. Anyone who pretends to be very spiritual while ignoring their emotions ends up building a false peace that collapses at the first conflict. True spirituality does not consist in denying what we feel, but in transforming those emotions into strength, clarity, and awareness. When one learns to observe their anger without judging it or fearing it, they discover that within it there is invaluable information about who they are, what they need, and where they must direct their life. Anger, when properly understood, becomes an inner compass, a signal that shows us where we have allowed others to take what is ours, where we remained silent when we should have spoken, and where we have carried responsibilities that do not belong to us. Anger also teaches us about dignity. It reminds us that we were not born to be trampled on, manipulated, or devalued. It reminds us that the soul defends itself when it can no longer tolerate abuse, lies, or injustice. But it also warns us when the wound is ours and not the world's, when anger is born from the ego and not from the spirit, when the reaction does not correspond to the event, but to accumulated pain that was never attended to. That is why to look at anger is to look at the soul naked, to see its scars, its fears, its unfulfilled desires, and its deepest frustrations. The goal is not to eliminate anger, but to understand it. To transform it into a controlled, intelligent, and dignified force. To turn it into a shield, not a weapon. To allow it to speak, but not to rule us. When one learns to walk hand in hand with their anger, without fear, without shame, and without impulsiveness, then consciousness expands, character is strengthened, and the spirit advances toward a higher level of emotional maturity. For whoever has learned to master their own anger has learned to master an essential part of themselves. And only from that inner mastery can one build a life that is truly conscious, balanced, and free. Reflection 2: The transit of consciousness toward the spiritual plane. The transit of consciousness toward the spiritual plane does not occur in a miraculous instant nor in an extraordinary ritual, but in the silent awakening of the mind and the spirit through experiences that mark, hurt, transform, and finally elevate. It is not a journey outward, but a journey inward, a process in which the human being begins to detach from the illusions and attachments that bind him to pain, in order to discover, little by little, that he has always carried within himself a force greater than his own thoughts, a truth deeper than his limited beliefs, and a light more powerful than his shadows. The spiritual plane is not a place one reaches after dying, but a state of consciousness that is attained while one is alive, when one learns to see beyond form, ego, conflict, and fear. The human being begins this transit when something inside him stops conforming to the superficial explanations of life. When he discovers that not everything he feels has a physical origin, that not everything he sees is truly in front of his eyes, that not everything he knows comes from his experience, and that not everything he thinks belongs to him, because the mind is a territory influenced by deep memories, by the unconscious, by spiritual forces, and by invisible energies that shape destiny. Spiritual awakening begins when one dares to question what one always believed one knew, when one recognizes that there exists an order greater than human logic, and when one opens to the possibility that life contains mysteries that can only be understood through humility, introspection, and connection with the sacred. As consciousness expands, the human being begins to distinguish between the noise of the world and the inner voice. He understands that most of his suffering is born of ego, of resistance, of the fear of losing what he cannot possess, or of the insistence on holding on to what no longer has life. The spiritual plane teaches that nothing is permanent, that everything is cyclical, that each stage brings a lesson, that each loss opens a new path, and that each pain is a bridge toward a stronger and more luminous version of oneself. When the spirit begins to understand this, the person stops fighting against life and begins to flow with it, stops battling the inevitable and begins to observe clearly what once confused him, stops blaming the world for what he feels and begins to recognize his inner power. The transit toward the spiritual plane also implies facing one's own shadows. There is no true elevation without internal confrontation, there is no light without first recognizing the darkness each one carries. Spiritual consciousness is not avoidance, not fantasy, not self-deception disguised as faith, it is pure courage. It is the ability to look at what hurts without fleeing, to accept what one has been without shame, to ask for forgiveness when necessary, to forgive even when it hurts, and to let go of what life has already decided to close. Only the one who faces his truth can expand toward a higher energy. Only the one who recognizes his wound can transform it into a point of strength. Only the one who lets his masks fall can receive the light without distortion. As this transit advances, the person begins to feel a deeper connection with God, with purpose, with noble spirits, and with intuition. He learns to interpret signs that once went unnoticed, to feel presences he once ignored, to understand silences he once perceived as empty. He discovers that the spiritual is not an isolated act, but a way of living, a way of thinking, speaking, acting, and relating to others. The spiritual plane manifests itself in patience, serenity, clarity of judgment, compassion toward those who suffer, and firmness toward those who cause harm. Whoever achieves this integration stops reacting impulsively and begins to respond from understanding, calm, and inner wisdom. When consciousness finally reaches a higher level, the person experiences something few understand, true inner freedom. A state in which one is no longer a slave to the past, nor to fears, nor to the expectations of others, nor to the wounds that once ruled one's life. Spiritual freedom does not mean the absence of problems, but the ability to face them with maturity, with light, with direction, and with dignity. It means knowing who one is, where one is going, and why one lives. It means having discovered that life is not in the hands of chaos, but in the hands of a divine order that unfolds even when we do not understand it. At that point, the human being stops asking for miracles and becomes one himself, stops seeking answers outside and finds them within, stops walking in darkness and becomes the bearer of his own dawn. This transit never ends. The expansion of consciousness is an eternal process, because each experience reveals a deeper level, each fall leads to greater understanding, and each awakening opens the door to another that is even more luminous. Life itself is a spiritual path for those who have eyes to see, a heart to feel, and the wisdom to interpret. And when one understands this, one no longer lives from fear, but from trust, no longer from resistance, but from conscious surrender, no longer from doubt, but from the faith that is built step by step. Thus, little by little, the soul ascends, the mind is illuminated, and the person discovers that the spiritual plane is not a destination to which one arrives, but a state that is conquered from within. Reflection 3: Life is filled with obstacles. Life is filled with obstacles not as a punishment nor as a whim of destiny, but as an inevitable and sacred process of character formation, inner strength, and spiritual growth. Every trial that appears along the path arrives with a purpose that many times we cannot understand in the moment, but that with time reveals itself as a fundamental piece in the construction of our emotional maturity, our wisdom, and our stability. Obstacles are, in reality, the most severe teachers but also the most sincere. They are the ones that do not lie to us, the ones that do not flatter us, the ones that do not please us, but that have the ability to show us what we are made of, how strong our faith is, how much resistance we have to survive adversity, and how much dignity we possess to remain firm without losing the essence of who we are. No one walks through this world without stumbling, without falling, without losing something they loved, or without facing a challenge that leaves a mark. Obstacles are the way life reminds us that we are not invincible, that we do not know everything, that we do not have absolute control over events, and that we need to cultivate humility, patience, and discernment in order to move forward. It is easy to give thanks when everything is going well. True growth arises when gratitude remains even in the middle of the storm, when faith does not break before failure, when hope is not lost despite disappointments, and when the spirit rises even when the body and the mind are exhausted. The obstacle is not the end of the road, but the sign that we are being prepared for something greater. Every difficulty carries within it a teaching that cannot be acquired in any other way. Losses teach detachment, betrayals teach boundaries, failures teach direction, delays teach patience, injustices teach character, Solitude teaches introspection, and pain, when it is accepted without victimhood, teaches spiritual strength. It is no coincidence that the wisest, most balanced, and strongest people we know have gone through hard experiences. The spirit is tempered like iron, under fire, under pressure, and under constant transformation. Whoever has never faced challenges rarely develops depth, and whoever runs from them rarely discovers who they are. But obstacles not only reveal our weaknesses, they also reveal our hidden capacities. We discover that we can endure more than we believed, that we can reinvent ourselves when life forces us to change, that we can be brave even when we feel fear, and that we are capable of being reborn even when we believed everything was lost. Difficulties awaken talents that were asleep, open paths we would never have considered, and bring to light an inner strength that does not appear in moments of comfort. Life, with its challenges, pushes us to grow in the direction of our best version, and although at times it hurts, it always leaves us transformed. However, the true key is not in avoiding obstacles, but in understanding them. Those who understand the nature of their trials stop seeing them as curses and begin to see them as challenges that the spirit can overcome. Inner attitude determines more than the obstacle itself. The one who becomes bitter becomes paralyzed, the one who complains becomes worn down, the one who blames the world becomes chained, but the one who faces, who analyzes, who breathes and continues walking, transforms the challenge into evolution. Life always rewards the one who perseveres, the one who keeps a clean heart even in the middle of conflict, the one who holds on to faith when everyone else loses it, and the one who preserves their dignity when it would be easier to fall into frustration or anger. Obstacles also serve as a spiritual filter. They separate those who walk with purpose from those who give up easily. They reveal the quality of the environment that surrounds us, exposing who is truly with us and who is only present while things are easy, and they force us to make decisions that we once avoided out of fear, but that become necessary in order to advance. In the midst of an obstacle, life forces us to ask ourselves what we want, who we are, and where we are going. And those questions, when answered with deep honesty, are often more valuable than any easy victory. Life is filled with obstacles because without them there would be no growth, no evolution, no transformation. No one becomes wise without having been struck by life, no one becomes strong without being tested, no one reaches spiritual maturity without having confronted their limits and their fears. Obstacles are the chisel that carves the soul and turns it into something more resistant, more noble, and more conscious. They are the way God, the spirits, and destiny prepare us for greater paths, for deeper missions, and for responsibilities that can only be carried by someone who has learned to stand within themselves and within their faith. Accepting this does not eliminate pain, but it makes it meaningful. Understanding this does not erase difficulties, but it makes them bearable. And living with this understanding does not avoid challenges, but it transforms the way we face them, with dignity, with serenity, with clarity, and with an inner strength that nothing and no one can break. Because when one recognizes that every obstacle is part of a greater purpose, one stops asking why, and begins to ask for what? And in that change of question lies true spiritual evolution. Reflection 4, The Man Who Knows. The man who knows is not the one who accumulates information nor the one who repeats others' knowledge as if it were his own, but the one who has walked through life with open eyes, an awakened heart, and a consciousness in constant observation. True knowledge is not born only from study, but from lived experience, from pain faced, from corrected mistakes, from decisions that transform destiny, and from silent battles that forge inner strength. The man who knows does not boast about his wisdom, he embodies it. He does not shout it, he demonstrates it. He does not impose it, he radiates it. His presence speaks louder than his words, because genuine wisdom is not displayed, it is breathed. The man who knows is humble because he understands that no one knows everything and that learning never ends. He has seen the arrogant fall, he has seen those who believe themselves invincible fail, and he has seen how life places each person where they belong. His humility is not weakness, it is greatness. It is the inner certainty that strength needs no showmanship and that true respect is earned through coherence between what is said and what is done. The wise man walks without haste because he understands that life is not raced, it is understood. He does not compete with anyone because he knows that each person has their own path, their own timing, and their own lessons. He does not envy, because he knows the price of growth. He does not judge, because he has survived mistakes that others cannot even imagine. He does not criticize, because he knows that everyone fights demons that cannot be seen from the outside. The man who knows is also prudent. He has learned to speak when he must and to be silent when necessary. He understands that words can heal, but they can also destroy, they can illuminate, but they can also confuse, they can open paths, but they can also close them. That is why the wise man speaks with intention, listens with attention, and acts with precision. Each of his decisions is born from deep analysis, from trained intuition, and from a spiritual connection that allows him to distinguish between what is beneficial and what destroys, between what elevates and what sinks, between what builds and what diverts. His prudence is a shield against impulsiveness, a lighthouse in the midst of chaos, and a guide for those who seek clarity. The man who knows has also learned to withdraw when the energy of a place no longer belongs to him. He does not insist where there is no growth. He does not cling to what has already fulfilled its cycle. He does not remain where what he receives is wear, conflict, or dishonesty. He knows that the soul becomes contaminated when it stays too long in environments that wound it, and he understands that withdrawing is not surrendering, but protecting the inner peace that cost him so much to achieve. The wise man chooses his battles, chooses his environments, and chooses his companies with the same precision with which a craftsman chooses the correct tool for each task. Because not all company contributes, not all environments strengthen, and not all battles deserve energy. The man who knows also knows how to love. Not from dependence, but from freedom, not from fear, but from conscious surrender, not from emptiness, but from inner fullness. His love does not suffocate, it accompanies; it does not demand, it understands; it does not manipulate, it nurtures. He knows that true love cannot be built from emotional lack, but from the strength of two souls that recognize and respect each other. He has understood that to love is not to possess, but to share, that to love is not to suffer, but to grow, that to love is not control, but trust. And that understanding transforms the way he relates to others, because only the one who loves himself can love another in a healthy way. The man who knows has also learned to relate to God, not from fear, but from awareness, not from desperation, but from daily connection, not from superstition, but from the deep certainty that the spiritual guides every step. He does not ask for signs for everything, because he has learned to see them in simplicity. He does not ask for constant miracles, because he knows that life itself is already a miracle. He does not seek to blame the divine, because he understands that many of his trials are born from his own decisions. His relationship with the sacred is intimate, deep, honest, and constant. It is not spectacle nor display, but a silent dialogue that strengthens the spirit and clears the mind. The man who knows is not perfect, but he is conscious. He is not invulnerable, but he is strong. He is not eternal, but he knows how to leave a mark. His wisdom does not come from standing out above others, but from overcoming his own self of yesterday. He lives in peace not because he has not gone through wars, but because he has survived them. He walks with light not because he has never known darkness, but because he learned to ignite his own flame in the middle of it. And his greatest greatness is not in what he possesses, but in what he is. It is not in what he shows, but in what he transmits. It is not in what he appears to be, but in the depth of his spirit. In the end, the man who knows understands that life is a journey of constant evolution, where every experience, every loss, every victory, and every fall has a purpose. He knows that the soul is in permanent construction and that every day brings an opportunity to rise, to improve, and to live with more clarity and more truth. And that understanding, more than any intellectual knowledge, is what turns an ordinary man into an extraordinary being. Reflection 5. Living in a dictatorship. Living under a dictatorship is to inhabit a territory where fear becomes a daily language, where freedom ceases to be a right and becomes a memory, where truth is manipulated according to the convenience of power and where the human soul learns to resist even when it is tired, beaten, or deprived of hope. A dictatorship is not only a political system, it is a psychological, emotional, and spiritual environment that invades every aspect of the life of a people. It infiltrates their thoughts, their decisions, their silences, their way of loving, and even their way of dreaming. It does not only oppress bodies, it also oppresses minds, hearts, and consciences. And that deep impact does not disappear overnight, because those who have lived under a tyrannical regime carry invisible marks that only others who have suffered the same can understand. In a dictatorship, lies are imposed as the norm and truth is punished as a crime. The citizen does not speak freely because he knows that every word may turn into chains, an interrogation, a separation from his family, or even death. That is why people learn to filter their thoughts, to hide their opinions, to live cautiously, to distrust even those who should be allies. Social distrust is one of the deepest damages left by an authoritarian regime, because it destroys the natural human capacity to trust, to unite, to organize, and to build together. A dictatorship wants isolated, divided, fearful, and emotionally exhausted citizens, because a united people represents the greatest threat to any tyrant. But the greatest danger of a dictatorship is not only in its capacity to control, but in its ability to make people accustomed to oppression. When a nation lives too long under repression, it begins to normalize abuse, to justify injustice, to rationalize fear, to accept forced poverty, and to resign itself to the lack of rights. And that resignation is the deadliest poison that a regime can inject into its people, the idea that there is nothing that can be done. That phrase, repeated from generation to generation, destroys the inner strength of a society faster than any weapon, because it kills the spirit before it kills the body. However, even under the cruelest dictatorship, the human spirit finds ways to resist. It resists in the whispers shared at night, in the thoughts that no one can control, in the dreams that power cannot confiscate, in the small acts of silent rebellion that oppressors never see coming. It resists in the memory of those who have fallen, in the hope of those who still live, and in the deep faith that no reign of injustice is eternal. Universal history has proven it again and again. Dictators fall, peoples survive. Tyrants die, countries are reborn. And although the night may seem eternal, there is always a dawn reserved for those who had the courage to resist it. Living in a dictatorship also reveals the true nature of the human being. There are those who sell themselves out of fear or convenience, there are those who become corrupted by power, there are those who become dehumanized by blind obedience. But there are also anonymous heroes, those who protect others, those who hide, those who inform, those who help, those who risk everything, those who speak even knowing the cost, and those who never accept lies as truth. These beings, often invisible to the world, are the ones who sustain the spirit of the nation, who keep dignity alive, and who prevent the collective soul from being completely destroyed. A dictatorship leaves deep wounds, but it also leaves teachings that no democratic system can offer: the understanding of the true value of freedom, the importance of thinking for oneself, the need to protect truth, the urgency of education, the responsibility of choosing leaders with conscience, and the moral obligation to never allow history to repeat itself. Those who have lived under a tyrant understand that freedom is not a luxury, but a spiritual necessity, that rights are not gifts, but conquests, and that the voice of the people is more powerful than any army when it is united and awakened. But the greatest lesson a dictatorship leaves is that no human power, no matter how absolute it may seem, can defeat the spirit of a people who refuse to surrender. Oppression may last for years, even decades, but the day always comes when the collective conscience rebels, when fear is broken, when dignity awakens, and when truth demands to be spoken. That day is not decided by the dictator, it is decided by the soul of the nation. Because peoples, just like individuals, have a limit, a point where they no longer accept chains, where they no longer tolerate abuses, and where they no longer want to live on their knees. Living in a dictatorship is a profound test of the human spirit. It teaches us to value what was once taken for granted, to discern between what is true and what is manipulated, to develop courage, to strengthen faith, and to sustain hope even when it seems impossible. And although the night of oppression may seem endless, the light always returns. Because where there is consciousness, there is resistance. Where there is memory, there is strength. And where there is a people who decide to rise, no tyrant can remain standing forever. Reflection 6: The Instinct of Faith and Survival. The instinct of faith and survival is an ancestral force that has lived within the human being since the earliest times. It is a deep impulse that is not learned, not imitated, not copied, and not taught in any school. It is born in the same place where the most ancient fears originate, the most sincere desires, and the inner strength that only appears in the decisive moments of life. Survival and faith are two energies that, although they seem different, actually nourish each other. Survival keeps the body standing, faith keeps the spirit awake. The first sustains physical life, the second sustains inner life. Without survival the body dies, without faith the soul fades. The instinct of survival is activated in circumstances that put our stability, our security, our family, our dignity, or our very life to the test. It is the immediate reaction that appears when one feels that everything could be lost. But that instinct, by itself, does not guarantee victory. Many people survive physically the blows of life, but remain emotionally or spiritually destroyed. That is why the perfect complement is necessary: faith. Because faith is what sustains when logic collapses, when human strength is insufficient, when exhaustion weighs more than hope, and when fear threatens to paralyze. Faith is the silent breath that whispers, "Continue," even when there is nothing visible left to hold on to. True faith is not fantasy nor illusion, it is a deep state of consciousness that reminds the human being that there is a greater order than visible chaos, that there is a force that accompanies him even in his darkest hours, and that there is a purpose behind the hardest trials. Faith does not deny pain, but illuminates it. It does not eliminate obstacles, but makes them passable. It does not magically transform reality, but transforms the way we face it. And when faith accompanies survival, the human being becomes a spiritual warrior capable of withstanding storms that would have destroyed others. Life is full of moments where the instinct of survival mixes with faith in unexpected ways. When a mother protects her child, when an elderly person struggles to remain standing despite pain, when a sick person shows strength where there should be no energy left, when an immigrant crosses borders with the hope of a better future, when an abused person rises after years of suffering, when someone who has lost everything decides to begin again. There is the instinct of survival, but faith is also there sustaining those steps. Faith is the invisible engine that allows the body to keep walking even when the mind no longer understands how. The human being does not discover true faith in peaceful days, he discovers it in the abyss. He does not discover it when everything flows, but when everything collapses. He does not discover it when he has answers, but when he only has doubts. And it is at that point where faith ceases to be a belief and becomes a deep certainty that comes from the Spirit. Because authentic faith is not born from comfort, but from necessity. It is not born from pride, but from fragility. It is not born from arrogance, but from the absolute humility that arises when one recognizes that he can go no further, and yet still continues. The instinct of faith and survival also reveals who we truly are. Some surrender at the first sign of difficulty, others discover within themselves a strength they did not even know existed. Some curse life, others face it with courage. Some break, others transform. Not because some are better than others, but because spiritual awakening occurs at different moments and under different circumstances. But all, absolutely all, carry within themselves the capacity to survive and the capacity to believe. What makes the difference is when they decide to activate that strength and for what purpose they use it. The union between faith and survival also teaches spiritual discipline. It teaches that life does not sustain itself, that character must be worked on, that the mind must be trained, that the spirit must be cared for, and that energy must be protected. Living is not merely existing, it is fighting, sustaining hope, rising again and again, adjusting one's course, asking for help when needed, accepting the inevitable when necessary, and finding in God the strength that life sometimes does not give. And that discipline becomes, over time, an inner armor that no obstacle, no enemy, and no circumstance can completely destroy. When the human being comes to understand this union, the union between the faith that illuminates and the survival that pushes, he reaches a higher level of consciousness. He becomes stronger, more patient, wiser, and more humble. He learns to interpret his own emotions with clarity, to face his fears with courage, and to sustain his decisions with firmness. And he discovers that surviving is not merely staying alive, but remaining awake, conscious, and connected to the purpose that brought him into this world. The instinct of faith and survival is, finally, the purest expression of the human will and the most intimate connection with the divine. It is the bridge that unites the body with the spirit, the earth with the sky, suffering with evolution, and darkness with light. Whoever has survived thanks to his faith or whoever has strengthened his faith thanks to his survival, is no longer the same person. He becomes someone stronger, more conscious, wiser, and more capable of transforming his life and the lives of those around him. Because faith does not only save, it also elevates. And survival does not only protect, it also awakens. Together, they form an invincible force that turns the human being into a creator of his own destiny. Reflection 7. Betraying, hurting, or murdering loved ones for money. Betraying, hurting, or murdering loved ones for money is one of the darkest manifestations of human moral decay, an unmistakable sign that conscience has been corrupted to a point where ambition destroys the very essence of love, dignity, and loyalty. When a human being allows money to become their god, their only emotional compass and their spiritual guide, they lose the ability to distinguish between the sacred and the profane, between what is right and what is vile, between what is human and what is inhuman. Money, by itself, is not evil. What destroys the human being is idolatry, obsession, uncontrolled greed that turns a weak soul into an instrument of evil. And when that weakness combines with selfishness, envy, or resentment, it becomes a poison capable of breaking the deepest bonds, even between parents and children, siblings, partners, or lifelong friends. Betrayal for money reveals a spirit that has renounced its own light. No one betrays a loved one from one day to the next. It is a slow process in which the heart grows cold, the conscience fades, and the ego grows without control. The person who betrays was already lost long before the final act. Betrayal is only the visible result of an internal fall that had been forming over time. And what is most painful is that such betrayal not only destroys the victim, but also the traitor, because whoever hands someone over for money also hands over their own soul, their honor, and the spiritual integrity that kept them connected to the divine. Money can buy silence, favors, opportunities, or comforts, but it can never cleanse the moral blood of one who has betrayed an innocent person. Hurting a loved one for money is even more perverse, because it implies a conscious act in which a person takes advantage of the vulnerability of someone who trusted them. That wound is not always physical, many times it is emotional, material, or spiritual. It may be stealing an inheritance, manipulating a will, deceiving an elderly parent, taking what does not belong to them, taking advantage of a family member's illness, or breaking a relationship out of greed. This type of evil has a deep root, the inability to recognize the value of family, the meaning of love, and the moral commitment every human being should feel toward those who have accompanied them in life. Hurting a loved one for money is not only a betrayal, it is an act of dehumanization. But the most extreme form of this degradation is murder for money. And although it may seem impossible to understand, human history is full of cases in which greed led people to commit unimaginable atrocities against their own loved ones. Whoever kills in order to obtain money does not only destroy life, they destroy their destiny, their soul, their spirituality, and the possibility of finding peace on any plane. That crime is not erased by tears, repentance, or excuses. It is an act that energetically marks the murderer and their descendants, because innocent blood leaves deep marks that extend beyond the physical and transfer to the spiritual plane, where nothing remains hidden and everything is judged with a justice that cannot be bought or manipulated. But even within this stark subject, there exists a profound lesson for those who have lived it from the position of the victim or the survivor. Being betrayed for money opens a wound that does not close easily. It awakens a pain that breaks trust and leaves scars on the soul. However, it also reveals important truths. It shows who is with you without interest, who values you beyond the material, who walks with you out of love, and who only approaches when they need something. Betrayal, as painful as it may be, purifies the environment. It removes from your life those who did not deserve to be there, frees you from false bonds, and forces you to strengthen your intuition, your character, and your discernment. Spiritually, life always protects those who act with righteousness. And although at times it may seem that traitors prosper, prosperity based on injustice is a mirage that sooner or later collapses. Nothing built with evil endures. Nothing obtained through betrayal brings peace. Nothing achieved through greed brings freedom. And whoever wounds, betrays, or kills for money ends up trapped in an emotional and spiritual prison that has no visible bars, yet carries inevitable consequences. The true lesson for those who read this reflection is to understand that integrity is a treasure that must never be sold. That family is a sacred bond that must not be broken by ambition. That money serves, but does not save. That spirituality guides, but does not permit injustices. And that true love, the love that is born from the soul and not from interest, is worth more than any inheritance, property, or fortune. Those who understand this live in peace, sleep in peace, and die in peace. Those who do not live trapped in an emptiness that no amount of money will ever be able to fill. Professor Jose Alberto Espinosa Barrero. Tadenki Sinki Zaango Luyente Kongo. O Ne Shango Oba Oloyu.